We're so excited to start the healing series today with Sundus Abdul Hadi. Sundus is an artist and writer of Iraqi origin. Her work is a reflection on trauma, struggle, and care. Her upcoming book, Take Care of Yourself, is a nonfiction book about care, curation, and community. Her work is a collaborative cross-border project which moves from grief to an alliance with different communities, including Black and Indigenous movements. Thank you, Sundus, for being with us today.
Thank you, Lara, for the introduction.
Thank you, Lara, for such a lovely introduction. Sundus, thank you for being with us, and everyone, thank you for joining. Ahla wa sahla. Sundus, I'd love to start speaking to you about your upcoming book, Take Care of Yourself, which is based on an exhibit that was in Montreal. Would you mind telling us a little bit about the exhibit to begin with before we delve into the book?
Yes. So I just want to thank everybody for taking time on this Saturday to join this talk. It really is very, very warming to see a lot of names and not yet faces that I know, but also people that I don't, which is always a really great honor. So thank you for starting with Take Care of Yourself, because it's my new baby, and slowly, bringing it into the world has been a very beautiful gift. I call it the gift that keeps giving, because the first iteration of the book was an exhibition that was held in 2017 in Montreal, which is where I am right now, where I've been based and have lived for the past 25 years. It's my adopted land, so to speak. So with Take Care of Yourself, it was part of my research creation project for my master's in media studies at Concordia. But I call it an academic project with roots in real life, because I would have done this project whether I was doing my degree or not, and I just felt like might as well just hit two birds with one stone and do something that I really believe in and be able to get a degree at the same time. And I had just finished writing and illustrating Shams, which is my children's book about healing from trauma and about survival. It's magical realism, so it's made for children and for youth and for big kids like us, who basically can relate to the story of a little girl made of glass. And one day this young girl breaks into a million pieces and she has to put herself back together again. So I'd spent a good part of the past decade really thinking a lot about what it means to heal. And I don't use that word loosely, and I don't use the word trauma loosely either. I feel like it's a very, very heavy concept. I've spent most of my time thinking about these really deep, heavy concepts, trying to lighten them, or trying to find a way where we can actually become empowered through the experiences that have caused us so much suffering or so much hardship. And it's very relatable. I feel like with trauma, it's something that is, found across communities and across all kinds of different people. But the thread that I was really trying to follow was this idea that as deeply rooted communities, or communities who have come from struggle, colonialism, and different kinds of structural oppressions, how we can find stories that can empower our communities and start breaking it, like intergenerational trauma, and being able to articulate it through simple stories like Shams, the children's book, and then the deeper, more rigorous study through what I ended up doing with Take Care of Yourself. So with Take Care of Yourself, it was 20 amazing artists. It was actually a couple more, almost 27 contributors who I quote unquote curated. I always feel still a little bit uncomfortable with that term, but we'll talk about that later. It's more to do with like power dynamics, right, in the art world. But I brought together a collection of 20 plus amazing artists from different communities, Arab, Black, Indigenous, and people from the diversity of our my community and also the networks that it reached, because I did a call for submissions at the time. And all of their work had something to do with the intersections of struggle and care.
Mm.
And I found that to be really, really fascinating. You know, I'd been spending this time working on Shams on my own. It was a very, you know, as a writer, as an artist, I think we can all relate to this experience of working in isolation or working very much in this, you know, this bubble that you create for yourself to create. But then when you look out and you start seeing that actually there are dozens and dozens of artists who are engaged in the same work, and then you look even further back and you're like, oh my God, people have been doing this actually for a long time, and they've paved the way for us who are in this generation to continue that work. It just becomes this incredible community experience. It becomes a collective experience. And I'm starting to realize that that's happening live as we speak. There is like a collective consciousness that is based around looking deeply at the traumas that we carry and the traumas that we inherit, and finding ways to articulate it and break it, you know?
Mm.
So
Absolutely. I love the fact that you came together and worked as an artist and as a curator with all these different artists, and were able to create that physical space, which becomes kind of like a forum for collective consciousness. And I think in many ways we're luckier than, and this is a very loose and broad statement, but our previous generations who didn't have the luxury of being able to talk about fatigue and trauma in the same way that we do. And so having that space where you can share it with people and foster that community around that consciousness is very interesting. And so basically the exhibit was a physical space that you shared that exhibited different artists' work. Is that right?
yeah, so it was a pop-up storefront in Montreal, like right downtown on Saint Laurent. And if anybody knows Montreal, it was like a really great storefront, like accessible location for passerbys. It was free. It was open for a week. And yeah, it was a really beautiful experience having all of that work up on the wall, sharing that one space. And the space itself it became like a community space of sorts. People would come through every day, passerbys, people who would never normally go to a gallery were coming through, spending time there. The artists were coming through. We had artist talks and panels and a workshop, and just it was an experience, I feel, that was kind of the filled a void that we all really, really needed in this city and in, you know, other places where, you know, we feel like we're also scattered, and we just need a place to gather where all of our thoughts, our ideas, are, you know, the things that empower us and inspire us about who we are as, you know, artists. And I use this word also loosely, but artists along the margins. We can talk about that later, but I don't like that word at all. Marginalized or margins. And it's like, no, we're not marginalized. Actually, we're powerful, and we've taken our space. So the actual physical space was really, really needed. It's still needed. It was a temporary pop-up space, but my hope is that through the book, when I first started out with working, you know, take care of yourself and turning it into a book, I wanted the book to carry that same essence, the same energy that space had. So the same feeling that the visitors would come and have when they were in the gallery, connecting with the works, feeling seen, feeling heard, could translate into an actual physical object that they can like take with them and pass from hand to hand, and open up at any random page and be like, oh wow, this is the path that's been paved for people like me and others in our community.
So building on that, who did you have in mind when you wrote the book? And just to give others a bit more background, I mean, as a reader of the book, it's quite interesting because, as you say, it's you, but it's also all these different artists that you're giving a voice to, and that comes out both visually in the book and obviously in the words that are written. So as you were writing the book and basing it on this exhibit, who did you have in mind as your audience?
I just want to say I didn't give a voice to anybody because their voices are already so strong and so present in my life. It was just an opportunity. I felt it was an opportunity for all of us to kind of have that space. And this is something that I talk about it in the book as well. I talk about my own lived experience as an artist and how rare those kinds of opportunities are. So to be able to have an opportunity to be like, okay, this is who we are, this is our experience, this is my personal lived experience, it becomes like just like yalla, come, let's do this, let's join in, and let's take this space, claim this space together. So it was, for me, absolutely felt like a necessary and natural act to involve my community, not just the people who were involved in the exhibition, but also the OGs, like the people who paved the path. Emily Jasser wrote the foreword. Emily Jasser is a Palestinian artist who's been working in the arts industry for decades already, and has been one of the most influential people, at least for my work. And I've always felt that her work was so intimately connected to care as well. The works that she was doing, how she goes about it, and also the fact that she's experienced so much lack of care as an artist, as an established artist in the arts industry, as a person who's been censored, who has had, situations where her work was removed or prizes, it's like things that they get pushed under the rug. So I wanted those stories to really come out. And Suhair Hamad, of course, Palestinian American poet, who has been working as a poet and as an Arab woman in a scene, in an industry also, that it's an anomaly. And she's paved the path in such a beautiful way. So I wanted to also give homage to those. Emory Douglas, the former minister former minister of culture for the Black Panther Party in the United States, Muhammad Ali, like all of these people who I feel were really, really necessary to bring together to really make that voice louder. Listen, we are part of a much longer tradition, and it's like long game stuff. It's not just one thing that happened in Montreal in July 2017. It's actually part of a long lineage, and hopefully into the future. So to go back to your question of who did I write this book for, I'm a mom. I have 2 small kids. My daughter's 4 and my son is 7. And of course, they're not gonna be able to read this book now, but it's for their generation. It's for us to feel like we, our generation and the ones before, to be able to feel seen and heard. But it's more than anything for a younger generation, and going into a world that's changing really so fast. We're at a major turning point right now in the planet, in the universe, in the cosmos, or however, planetarily, we're at a major crossroads. You have this year specifically, and going into 2021, there's an actual planetary shift that's happening with Saturn and Jupiter. And it's like, it's fascinating to me to think that we're actually living right now at a very unique time. And we're going to be facing so much major change. I mean, just with coronavirus in the past 10 months, how much of our life has changed? How many injustices have been brought to the surface because of coronavirus? How many injustices have been coming out and like really rising up to the point where it's causing revolutions around the world? This is the energy that we're going into. And I feel like we need to be, more than ever, really taking care of ourselves, our mental, physical, and spiritual health in a way that maybe was never before, highlighted in the same way. But we're gonna need to be good going into this. This change isn't easy, and we're in it. And we need change more than anything else. Like yes, we're living it, but more than anything else, I feel like there has to be some major systemic shifts in the world that we're living in on many levels, economically, politically, structurally, climate situation.
Absolutely.
We're at a crossroads.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you say that, and we talked about this before. Sundus, one thing that I felt when I was reading your book is that on some level it sounds a bit like a manifesto. So a voice that's of different artists who are, as you say, experiencing different but similar and interlinked things, and they come from their own backgrounds and their histories, but there are common themes to all of this, which are the themes of collective consciousness and how do we take care of ourselves as a community and not just as individuals, and how do we come to terms with what is trauma, how to define trauma, and to be able to talk about that. And so bringing all of these voices together and writing together these ideas kind of reads like a manifesto of we're going to do this as a community. Can you tell me a little bit about that concept of community care, and how do we move on from self-care to community care in your view?
Wow, okay. Well, I guess it all starts with like lived experience, right? And like my path, my experience with trauma led me down this path, this journey that I'm on now. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, reading about it, studying myself, really trying to become like the best version of myself in a way. And it's an ongoing thing. It's always the goal, right? But I never before incorporated that lived experience into my work. I was always taking the observer role, where I was, looking outward and thinking, using imagination to shift the reality that I'm living in, that I'm observing. So with orchestra, for example, or with my work around Iraq, it's always been that. It was imagination, but it wasn't about my lived experience. So with Shams and then with the writing of Take Care of Yourself, I really decided that it was necessary to locate myself as well in that narrative. And not just myself, but all of the things that I've learned and like accumulated along the way. Because it's a lot of work, actually. It's work. Like self-work is work. And I call it work with like a capital W. Because a lot of the times that work that you do on yourself is invisible, or it's invisible to the person, the world around you, and undervalued a lot of the times, the work that we do, not just on ourselves, but especially the work that we do for our community, the care work that we do for our community. And that's everything from, it's everything. It's what makes the world go round. It's the food and the cooking and the nurturing and the checking up on, and the family care, caring for your elders, caring for the children, you name it, it's all of the stuff that make up what keeps us grounded.
Yeah.
So when it came to like really putting together all of these things that I've accumulated along the way, I guess it did end up sounding a little bit like a manifesto, but that's also because of what inspires me. I've always been inspired by like the Baghdad Modern Art Group's manifesto from their 1951 exhibition on the role of the artists. Yeah. So the Baghdad Group for Modern Art was founded in 1951 by one of Iraq's most influential artists, Jawad Salim. Their manifesto from a 1951 exhibition by the group states that the artist has a duty to interpret society by depicting current events and recording the social conditions of the country. This statement has had a far greater impact on my practice than anything I've come across in the Western canon. I believe that the impact of the Baghdad Group for Modern Art can be felt in many contemporary artistic and cultural communities in Iraq and in the greater Arab world. It is especially being revived now as a result of the October Revolution in Baghdad. But it's that position of like an artist really having a responsibility to their community and to society on like a greater scale. That's something that is mirrored and echoed in the Black Panther Party and in other revolutionary international liberation art movements that have happened around the world. And guess what? Most of these movements to be by artists of color, indigenous artists, artists from what I call the deeply rooted communities that have been impacted by colonialism. So it made sense. It just brought all of these worlds together.
Absolutely. It does make sense. And I think there's something interesting there, which is it's a sort of a temporal relationship, because you're talking about your experience as a person here and now, but as a person from a deeply rooted community or background or experience, you're also connected in many ways to the place that you were from, to your parents' experiences, to things that are inherited. And so part of that is a feeling that you belong maybe somewhere, but you're not quite there, and you still you take those experiences with you. So on that, there was something that was really interesting in your book, and I think it featured in the exhibit as well, that I wanted to specifically ask you about, and it was a piece by Dana al-Masri called Shim al-Yasmin, and I'm going to show everyone a photo of this.
Such a beautiful piece. People were coming to the exhibit especially to experience this work. It was amazing.
I can see why. So I can see why. I mean, for me, for instance, as a Palestinian, someone who spent a lot of time in the Levantine countries as a kid, it's a very nostalgic feeling to smell jasmines. Like you know, you're playing around your grandmother's house and there's little jasmine bushes everywhere, and you pick them up in the summer, and it's just, there's a bit of nostalgia there. So I wanted to ask you about, when we talk about intergenerational experiences and traumas and things that you take with you, what role does nostalgia play in that as well? Because as people who also grew up in a diaspora or as an immigrant community, there's certainly a bit of romanticization and nostalgia and history that you carry with you.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's I've thought a lot about this idea of nostalgia, and for me, as a Iraqi Canadian who's been, living here in Canada for most of my life, and I actually wasn't even born in Iraq. I was born in Abu Dhabi. It's being nostalgic for something that I've never known. It's a very strange feeling to be able to know something so intuitively and intimately, and like know a place or a feeling that you've never fully experienced. Like, of course, we visit, and I have these amazing memories of my grandmother's house, and those are the most formative memories in my life. But yeah, I mean, scent is something that is so connected to that. That's why with Dana's work, there was something that it added a whole other layer that is like non-articulatable. Like, you can't articulate that feeling that scent can awaken in you. I thought I'd read something from her artist statement. So she writes, "The power of scent is incomparable, as it is the strongest sense linked to memory. I chose to create this piece to showcase my inner struggle with light versus dark. As someone who has lived with anxiety and depression for most of my adult life, which I'm sure so much of us can relate to, myself included, I felt that only jasmines could represent the dichotomy of beauty and pain. This was a chance to express my vulnerability while also helping others accept theirs as well. By accepting the darker aspects of ourselves, we come to appreciate ourselves and others in the process." So shout out to Dana for doing this really timeless piece. And I feel like there's still so much more to be said about this concept nostalgia and unbelongingness, or feeling uprooted in a place where we don't necessarily feel a connection to. But it's I think it's a lifelong thing to try to find a way back, or at least try to lay roots down where you are physically are right now. It's a very strange feeling. So many people have written about it.
Of course. And I think the difficulty with that as well is the fact that you're talking about your inherited experiences and your past experiences or your family's past experiences, but at the same time there's going to be ongoing things in our life that will continue to contribute to that negativity or experiences of trauma. So taking Lebanon as an example, you can obviously point to people who are our age whose parents lived through the Civil War and they've carried that with them. But what happened over the summer was something that's unfathomable and unexpected, and it just adds a whole layer of trauma. So how do we build self-care practices, and how do we develop that in ourselves when trauma is an ongoing process? It's not something that happened and experienced and done and you move on from that. It's very much happening.
It's literally happening, and we can't keep up. We can't catch our breath. It's one thing after the other. And I feel this is one thing, being able to gather and talk about these kinds of things that often are so just float around in our heads and have no place to land. Like that's such an important thing, convening, just gathering with other people to talk about these things. Otherwise, they just stay abstract and it's harder to make sense of it. With our communities, like in Arab communities, and especially in Arabic, in our communities back home, seeking help for mental health is still kind of a taboo, and maybe also the industry, like not the industry, but like the clinical aspect of it is still not as evolved, not evolved, but you don't want to get thrown prescriptions left and right, and that's the same thing here. You would go to seek help from a mental health practitioner, and you would a lot of the times just get offered pills, like it's an easy fix, but that ends up creating so much more challenges and difficulties. It's there's a lot of work to do, Farah. I don't have an answer. Like that's the thing. I for me, with take care of yourself, although you think it reads like a manifesto, it's also just a series of questions that I want us to ask ourselves, that I want to ask myself, and as a reminder, just a reminder of the work that lays ahead of us. I'm definitely not like a self-help guru, because I struggle myself with my own self-care practices, and for me it's just a question of community. It makes a huge difference being able to heal on a collective level. And by community, I don't mean like your people that you don't know that happen to live in the same neighborhood, but the people who make you feel like in yourself and grounded, and that can offer the same kind of feeling too. Absolutely. A lot of times our communities scatter all over the world, and we just have to find ways to connect with each other, check in on each other, make sure that they're taking care of themselves. Like, did you take time to rest? Did you do what you need to kind of like do that rest and recovery that you need after a really extreme experience? Having those honest, real conversations. But I mean, for me, it's just a reminder to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sundus. I would love to speak a little bit about Shams as well. Shams is the book that you mentioned you wrote before working on this exhibit. So you wrote and you illustrated this book, but you also worked together with other artists, including Roy Saade and Ilsid on this project.
Yeah, so LC did the calligraphy on the cover, and there's five pages in the book also that have his signature beautiful calligraphy style. And the text that he used were actually monologues from the book that I asked him to create calligraphies for. The amazing design, the 2-page sizes where the text is on this like half page, was designed by Roy Saada, who is a Lebanese designer and photographer. So he also is my brother-in-law. Shout out to Roy. In the family. And yeah, Elsie and I also I consider her my brother. We go way back. And it's really amazing to be able to reach in and be like, I need your touch, you know, on this project, and to feel you know, that there is that mutual support and love as artists. So yeah, that's Shams.
Great, thank you for showing it to us. It's really beautiful. I'm pulling up some photos from Shams as well here. I think this is some of Esid's work. So why did you write something for a youth audience?
I wrote this book, actually, so I wrote this story before I became a mother.
Okay.
And I called the character Shams before I had my first pregnancy, and actually we ended up calling my son Shams as well.
Oh, that's so nice.
A little side note. It's a man, this book means so much to me. I wrote it because I needed a book like this when I was younger. I still need a book like this. I feel like we all need books that are just reminders of our innate ability to heal and to survive. And to survive sometimes the most intense hardships. Ironically, in the book, in Shams, the event that breaks her and shatters her into a million pieces is an explosion. And what happened in Beirut broke my heart. It broke my heart into a million pieces, and I felt like there are so many Shamses that need to feel that. I mean, it's still so early, and like you said, I think we're all still reeling from the shock, and the recovery will take a long time. But just to be able to have a book like this for youth in Iraq who have experienced explosions and bombs, youth in Yemen, youth in Palestine who live in this kind of space where there's walls that so the wall is a big part of the book as well. And the wall can be both, you know, a metaphorical space, and it can also be that physical, like apartheid wall. So to have a book like that for me is like medicine. It would have been medicine for me. And I wanted to do that. I wanted to offer something to youth where there is a lot of content out there about our trauma and our grief, but there isn't a lot of content about our healing and our survival. And I didn't want to just chalk it up to like the whole like, oh, we're resilient and that's enough. Oh, we're resilient, we just keep going. But that's a part of it. That's a part of what makes us exhausted. And that's also a very, you know, Western way of looking at it, like we're going to beat them down, but they're still going to come up, and that means that they're resilient, they can handle it. No, we can't actually. And we have to focus on that aspect of it's not just like a snap of the fingers. It's not something that we're built with to be able to withstand bombs and occupation and war and the far-reaching impacts of colonialism that are almost invisible. Like they're too invisible for us to even recognize sometimes. They're imprinted in our like genes at this point. I even think sometimes like anxiety and all of these ills that we're experiencing, these are all like bad coping strategies that nobody taught us, and nobody, like when are we going to be able to teach our youth that actually taking a deep breath will help? Taking a deep breath and like going and sitting by the water, being able to accept your experience no matter how difficult it is, having a strong faith or having a solid belief system will actually help with your recovery. These are all things that I feel I put in there in a very simple way, in a very simple monologue with the second character whose name is Shifa. So there's two characters, it's Shams and Shifa. Shifa, of course, in Arabic means healer. So that's all part of their monologue. It's just an idea that the complexity of emotions can also be simplified. You can simply articulate it in using your imagination. So with Shams, she experiences a lot of different emotions, from rage to this like the need for justice that comes like later in her journey, and like the confusion, this feeling of just like needing to cry a lot, just these little emotional the emotions that take over you when you're experiencing a hardship or trauma, and that it's okay to be rageful, and it's okay to be crying uncontrollably. It's okay to have
to transform as well.
And that's the beauty of it, is that the transformation. Trauma isn't all bad either. Trauma can also be an opportunity to transform. And that's been, I feel like, the most empowering part of this process, that when the work is put in, you can start to transform the trauma. I'm not saying cure it. You're not going to cure, I don't feel like PTSD can ever be cured, but you can transform through it and allow it to transform you. I know it's like really heavy stuff and it's still abstract, and everybody's on their own personal journey, and it's hard to just make a general statement. But this for me is, with writing Shams, I just wanted to approach it as an offering. And if a kid in Gaza, or a kid in Sana'a or Baghdad or Beirut, or an indigenous community here in Canada in Turtle Island, or a young Black kid in the Bronx, whatever their experience of trauma or systemic injustice has had on their life, I wanted Shams to be kind of like a character that empowers that experience.
I love that. The messages in the book are very real, they're very raw, but at the same time very beautiful. The book itself is so beautiful. I have the PDF copy and I can't wait to receive the physical copy and hold it and just spend time looking through the different photos and illustrations. I wanted to ask you one more thing about Shams, which is that you have it in English and in Arabic. And can you tell us about the process of distributing it in Arabic as well?
So that's the Arabic. It's a different cover. It's published by Tamer Institute. Same amazing design by Roy, but with Arabic text. It's amazing, like the power of just kind of like putting out something into the universe and getting it like responded to. When I wrote the story, I wrote it actually after I went to Palestine. It was one really impactful year where I had gone to Baghdad, had a really difficult experience there, and a few months later I went to Palestine and I did an artist residency. Very, very, like I felt very privileged and blessed to have the opportunity, because not many not many Palestinians can go to Palestine, right? So when I was there, we did an exhibition with the work that we had been working on at the residency, and it was an outdoor exhibition in Birzeit Old Town. And I had been working on an artist book. So before I started making books, I used to make like one-off artist books on canvas. And I exhibited the artist book, and I was one of the only artists that was showing whose work you could touch. Like I had put the book up on the wall, like I had nailed it on there, and I was actually inviting people to flip through it and just look at it. And all the kids of the neighborhood came to the wall where my work was at, and it was like a really beautiful thing where they felt like they could actually interact with the work and touch it, whereas all the other work was like, oh, you can't touch it, it's on the wall, it's art, you know. And the work was about flight. It was a flight series. And it was about like, oh, do I have it? It's right here. Yeah. So with this book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And yeah, it's all these characters who are in flight.
Oh, wow.
And
That's
there
so
were
interesting.
photos from Baghdad on my last trip, the trip that I was just telling you about.
That's the river.
Yeah. And the kids responded so well to it, even though I had never really thought about it. Like I never thought I want to make work for kids, but they just got it. Like there was no like fuss around it. They didn't need to like read an artist statement. They didn't need to like think deeply about the work. They just got it. They were like,
they engaged with it.
They engaged with it. They were like, this is about, you know, imagination and flying, and oh, I wish I could fly. And it gave me so much life seeing their reactions. And a couple of months later, so I went back to Montreal. When I wrote Shams, it came out in like I wasn't expecting to write this short story. And after I wrote it, I was like, I want this story to be translated into Arabic and published and distributed in Palestine, in refugee camps around the Middle East. I wanted to be read by youth in Iraq and Syria. And I want, like, that was a huge intention behind the work. Before, when it was still just written like a Word document. It's crazy. So subhanallah, I'm so grateful. Tamar Institute, who is an amazing nonprofit organization in Palestine. They do literary programs. They are like incredible in children's literature. One of the most socially aware organizations in the Middle East in terms of like putting out work that's like critically minded for youth. So they picked up the book and they published it in Arabic, and it's available in Palestine and wherever they distribute as well in the Middle East. I'm also selling copies on wearethemedium.com. So that ended up happening. I was supposed to go actually in the spring for the book launch, and it was a beautiful itinerary. It was to present the book in libraries and refugee camps and schools around Palestine, in Qudus and in Beit Lahem and in Ramallah. But unfortunately, coronavirus happened, but it's okay. I'll get there.
I get the chance to go again, and it's so nice that you were able to go to begin with and engage with people in the community and children, especially, because it's a big part of your work as well.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're going to launch into questions, even though there's so much more that I want to ask you and to share with everyone, but let's give a chance to others. The first question that we have is from Noufal Hamdan. She's very honored to get the chance to listen to this talk, and she has a quick question about the book. Does it mention positionality concept and struggling with identity? How did your kids interact and respond to the books?
Wow, okay. Positionality concept and struggling with identity. I think it's implicit. I don't think I specifically speak about those things, but I feel like, yes, actually. I respond more to the idea of one thing that was very, very inspiring and necessary for me to do through the book is to talk about how we identify ourselves using colonial words. So for us as communities of color, or communities from marginalized groups, or however way you want to describe it, basically not white, not coming from the places that we come from, whether Arab, Black, Indigenous, BIPOC, so to speak. I just don't like any of those words. And I thought a lot about this idea of how we position ourselves in the colonial language, or even in like the colonial structure. And I feel like this is part of systemic change. If we're going to change, if we want to see the changes happen, then we need to change the way that we talk about them, talk about our experience. So I choose to whenever I can, I chose to use the word deeply rooted whenever as a fill-in for the word colonized or marginalized or person of color or community of color. So I call it the idea of being deeply rooted, having ancient, an ancient identity, or an identity that goes back further and down further than what people expect from a marginalized group. It's to reclaim our majestic identity. But it really, like, I use that word specifically for communities who have experienced colonialism. So, and that's, I guess, with that idea of how we struggle with our identity, but more than anything, feel like struggling with how people perceive us as well. I hope that answers your question. Thank you so much for that. And there's honestly, I feel like with the other artists that are involved in the book, their stories are so beautiful, so diverse, and they are so articulate about that experience that there's so much there in terms of how these artists have chosen to speak about their experiences, and their identities are as diverse as our societies are.
I'm going to read out a question from Ahmed Ouda, who says, "Hi Sundus, I loved your comments on collective consciousness and community care. Is there a point when you feel it is more healing to be more individualistic? How can you tell when this is the case?"
Thank you, Ahmed. Yeah, I love those concepts. I write a lot about it in the book. Is there a point where you feel it's more healing to be more individualistic? Well, the way that I approach the book, and in general, I've been approaching this whole idea of self-care, is that it always starts with the self. Always. It has to start with the self, and more than anything, self-awareness. Being aware of yourself, and like being a critical thinker, being able to understand the cues that your body is telling you, to be able to know your limits and your boundaries with others. That's it. It has to start from the self, and then once you can't take care of other people in your community if you're not taking care of yourself. It can't be that sacrifice, so it starts with the self. It has to, and then from the self it extends into the community, and from the community it extends into the world, and that's the way I see it. That's like the manifestation of it. It's like a 3 layers of self, community, and world. Because and when I say critical thinking, like being self-aware and being critically minded, is even being critical around like the idea of how we take care of ourselves, like the things that we do as part of our self-care practices. Yes, of course they're individualistic, but are they harming anybody? Are they harming other communities? And it's simple stuff like sage, for example, like white sage. It's become like a trend. Everybody's burning sage. But where are you getting your sage from? Is it sourced from an indigenous community where it's sacred? It's a sacred herb that they've been burning for millennia, that is actually now becoming endangered because all of us are burning sage. Those are like little things that we have to start considering. Are we culturally appropriating another culture in our self-care practice? Are we doing things like I always find it harmful when people use terminology like spirit animal, or experiences with ayahuasca, or calling yourself a shaman. Like these are all things, like these are indigenous traditions that are sacred and that go back way before people in the West discovered them and exploited them. So yeah, that's for me. I write about it. There's a chapter I called Approach with Caution, where I put in all my cynical ideas around problematic self-care practices. But yeah, I mean, it all starts with the self and just connecting with your breath, I think.
Sundus, I wish I can show you my big bag of dried meramiye, which is a yearly gift that I get from my aunt in Jordan. That's where you should be getting your sage from.
Yes, exactly. And that's the other thing. It's this like we don't need to culturally appropriate, because most of us who are deeply rooted come from a very, very long lineage of amazing cultural practices that have to do with healing and self-care. A lot. We have so much there. It's literally right underneath our noses. As Arabs, as people who come from these parts of the world, this is a part of our culture and our traditions. The things that we burn, the incenses, the things we burn, the things we steep in tea, the prayers, all of, even like, by the way, collective grief and community gathering, that's a part of our culture as well. And it's found in most cultures, where this is a part, community care is actually like a part of who we are. And I feel like we have lost a little bit of that because of our displacement. You know, we're caught up in everything that's happening, and these traditions are coming back in a very perfect time. Even tattooing, by the way, is a healing practice.
What were some pivotal readings from your research?
Thank you so much, Nadia, for that question, because I'm like so passionate about my references. I'm such a nerd like that. The bibliography that I gathered over the years where I was researching Take Care of Yourself, actually all by people from deeply rooted communities. So I actually only referenced one white guy, and I'm very proud of that. And if you're interested in who the white guy was, it's a specialist in trauma. His name is Bessel van der Kolk. But yeah, the authors that I used are mostly Arab, Black, Indigenous. That was so important for me. Let me read you some names. I'll actually just pull out some books. Women Who Run with the Wolves. I don't use it much in Take Care of Yourself, but I read it when I was working. Like literally, it was the last book I read right before I wrote Shams, and it was really it opened up my imagination in such a beautiful way. So the author is Clarissa Pincolas Estes, and she writes. She's a Jungian psychoanalyst, but she takes like folkloric myths and stories from folklore from different indigenous cultures around the world and breaks them down in like a very interesting way. But like she'll tell the story and then she will analyze it. Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, which I think is like really necessary reading in this context of all the revolutions that are happening around the world. Notes of a Native Son, James Baldwin, whose work on like the role of the artist in at times of crisis and in these kinds of situations is so necessary. The Inconvenient Indian by Thomas King is like really necessary reading for anybody who's on these lands we call Turtle Island, North America, know the history. The best who ever did it, Edward Said with Orientalism. Manada Shabut, Modern Arab Art. This is like a classic, most necessary book for anybody who is interested in Arab art and culture. So much. I'm like, I love reading, and I thank you so much for that question, because actually it's really important for me to be able to shout out the people who did it before me. I'll show you one more book. This is one of my favorite books of all time. It was my father's, and it's called The Sense of Unity, the Sufi Tradition and Persian Architecture. And it's written by Nader Abdalan and Lala Bakhtiyar. And they write about the spiritual aspect of Islamic architecture, but by, an extension, Islamic art and culture. Everything from like sacred geometry to color and matter and form. And it's an incredible book that just like makes all the connections with our spiritual experience and our experience of like the world and how it's all connected, like the microcosm and the macrocosm.